Hello, what is up ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sylvester here from the likes of the Maxi Toys videos, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next installment of the forms of our Kirby Let's Plays marathon. This time around though, we're tackling through Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland for the Game Boy Advance. Now before you start this though, like there's an intro to go through. The peaceful world of Dreamland is in great danger. In Dreamland, dreams always flooded from the wonderful Fountain of Dreams. The Fountain of Dreams collected the hopes and dreams of all living things. It also responsible for the sweet dreams and rest that come and deep sleep. But one day, everyone in Dreamland lost their ability to dream. King Dedede was bathing in the Fountain of Dreams. He had even taken the Star Rod, the source of the fountain's power, and broken into pieces. So now Kirby must embark on an adventure to restore peaceful nap times to all the residents of Dreamland. Does that story look familiar to you? Well, that's only because this game is technically a remake of Kirby's Adventure for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and able to actually remake that on the forms of the Game Boy Advance systems. So even then though, that yeah, that's how this usually becomes a remake of the forms of Kirby's Adventure, because you can definitely tell why when we actually get into the actual game itself. So, obviously we're going to be playing this off the forms of Nintendo Wii U eShop download version of this particular title, because of the, you couldn't tell by the visual quality of this particular footage itself. So even then though, I'm gonna erase my file real quickly, so let's go ahead and get this thing started. Now obviously this game did first came out in the forms of, or this remake I should say, the particular remake of Kirby's Adventure did first released in the forms of Japan and North America, which is in 2002, but then later on in Europe, which is our country, but in forms of how the fact that this game later released in the forms of 2003, marks the 10th year anniversary of the original Kirby's Adventure's release, in the forms of Nintendo Entertainment System. So even then, I found this really cool by the looks of it, all that stuff. And yes, just like the ones in the UK releases of both Mario Party 6 and Mario Party 7, normally this game does normally has a the language selection screen by the forms of the European version, and that could be the same applies by the forms of Mario Party 4 and 5 as well. But even now, that's just besides the point though. So we've got ourselves game start. Alongside with the main adventure, we got ourselves sub-games and a sound test, which, conveniently enough though, the sound test was actually unlocked from the get-go this time around, compared to the likes of Kirby's Adventure. You do need to able to unlock sound tests before you're able to actually just, after when you complete extra game and all that stuff. And speaking of such, this is before when, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror exists, which, even then, I will explain more details onto that game as soon as we get into that, the actual point of, you know, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. And especially noticeable by the forms of Kirby's Adventure Wii, this game introduces the multiplayer. Well, we've already had multiplayer ever since during the likes of, well, by the forms of Kirby Superstar, by the forms of how the fact that you can able to actually use two controllers at the same time to able to do a cooperative playthrough of the forms of Kirby Superstar, and especially noticeable in Kirby Dreamland 3 as well, by the forms of the usage of the GUI, and Kirby 64 utilized the multiplayer aspect of the minigames. So, what's nice about this version though is the fact that you can able to actually just carry up to 4 players this time around though, that you can able to actually cooperate trying to able to actually tackle for this particular game itself, but in forms of not just by yourself, but also 4 other players, or in this case 3 other players as well. And of course, again, as far as I've mentioned this before, there will be sub-games that we would like to actually showcase off, but of course we're going to be starting things off with the forms of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland on the Game Boy Advance, and as usual, we're going to go for the exact same worlds as far as how it does it by the forms of remakes do nowadays. But even now, let's get started by the forms of the first world in this game, or in this case technically both Kirby's Adventure / Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. Here we off to Vegetable Valley, as we expected it's the first ever world in that particular game itself, and You probably noticed right from the start though, but in forms of some of these differences, as you can see right there, the graphical style has been remarkably different to the likes of how it does it in the 8-bit version counterparts. And of course, if you're actually entering here, we get ourselves the rare copy ability, but in forms of the UFO, which just like how it does it in the forms of the original Kirby's Adventure, we can able to actually do all sorts of things like shooting beams, or especially noticeable, we can able to do a beam wave. So, and speaking of which, is the fact that ever since during the likes of Kirby Superstar, aka Kirby's Fun Pack for the Super Nintendo, this game now finally makes a return by the forms of these copy ability hats, which even though you can definitely tell when we actually get ourselves like, let's just say a fire ability and stuff like that. But even then, we'll find out until we're able to actually get into these next couple of levels ahead. So, oh wow, that's actually a really great start, but in forms of obtaining the 1-up, and in forms of the actual gold game itself. So yeah, it's pretty awesome actually. So, yeah, today was actually in forms of the 24th of May. See, Fernando, well, there's not much else to tell about this point in time, folks. Besides the actual point of how the fact that, well, we're almost there to the forms of Nintendo's E3 2018 is about to be on its way, but in forms of the actual Nintendo Direct's E3 2018, because you know how Mario already mentioned about this and during the likes of Super Mario Odyssey Let's Play, how the fact that the actual premise of the E3 2018 is going to be most likely focusing on Nintendo Direct instead of like digital events, unlike the ones in you know, 2014 and 15. But ignoring the 2016 fictions and all that stuff, which I'm not exactly sure why they're ignoring the 2016's specific events. Well, it does add some surprising news, but in forms of the actually now announcing the new Zelda game's final name, but in forms of, you know, Breath of the Wild back then. And especially noticeable, but in forms of the other focus of that is the forms of Pokemon Sun and Moon for the 3DS. So, that's how it goes, hey? So, as you can see right there, I've got myself my Fire Kirby right there, and as you can tell that the Kirby ability hats is now finally back ever since during the likes of, you know, Kirby Superstar or Kirby's Fun Pack in the European countries as far as I'm aware, because even then though, despite the absence of the forms of, for those Kirby ability hats during the likes of Kirby's Dreamland 3, and especially noticeable in Kirby 64 the Crystal Shards, like granted it's only because of how the fact that of that particular choice methods is the fact that it actually did smash the able to, you know, continuation of the story based off from the Dark Matters trilogy, which even then, that makes it pretty obvious at this point. So I feel lack of, you know, tongue twisting at the end, folks. That's only because of how the fact that I really, we need to get some more drink and all that stuff. So, from here, though, the replacement of the forms of some of these minigames, but in forms of Kirby's Adventure, is now being replaced as new ones, as you can see right there, enjoying the likes of the actual hub world. So let's go and enter the store real quickly. So even now, we can actually come across into this first minigame, Bomb Rally. Press A to hit the bomb. So even now, that, as far as this name applies, is basically we have to pass the bomb to the other players. This minigame does feel very similar to how it does in forms of Hotbar Bomb for both Mario Party 1 and 2. However, unlike in Hotbar Bomb though, I'm pretty much stuck at this minigame. Because I figured the reason premise for this though is the fact that I was a little bit off when it comes to timing aspects, when it comes to able to tossing the bombs right back at those opponents. So, I must admit though, right away though, my skills was pretty crappy these days. But anyways though, let's move on to level 3. So, and obviously the music has been slightly updated as well, so even then though, as you expected that how the fact that we move on to the new generation instead of like although the music in this particular version of this game looks incredibly identical to how it does in the forms of the NES counterparts, but it's on the Game Boy Advance though this time around though, especially noticeable with the graphical styles and the sprites work usually improves upon so much, even especially noticeable when it comes to the enemy patterns, or especially noticeable with just enemies themselves, and even especially noticeable in bosses throughout, which you can definitely tell why when we're able to actually get to this kind of stuff though. So I believe I remember that during the likes of the actual premise of the forms of Kirby's Adventure Let's Play, that Mickey Mouse automatically dies in the 3rd level in the forms of Kirby's Adventure. That's only because of how the fact that, well, speaking of which, You know how the fact that in the original Kirby's Adventure on the Nintendo Entertainment System, that normally you have to able to actually fly when you're able to actually jump and press the directional pad up until you're able to actually just decide to able to go ahead and fly up. Well, this game, I'm very, very happy of how the fact that, well, you're still able to fly with the directional pad, going up and either way, but this time around though you can now finally able to actually jump and then press the jump button again until you're able to actually fly. So even then, I really appreciate about this kind of stuff. Wow, it looks like I keep on getting some more extra lives there, as far as you can see right there. And to make matters even much more comfortable than that, by the forms of this game compared to how it does it on the NES version of Kirby's Adventure, it just makes the entirety of the control scheme is a lot more better and smoother this time around though. View copy abilities for free, so even then though, although you still have yourselves a museum, just like how it does in the forms of Kirby's Adventure, like the ability you can able to actually just manage to get yourselves a copy abilities in the forms of the actual copy abilities what it actually contains in the museum, so even then I really appreciate it with it. So obviously, much like the ones in Kirby's Adventure, I might as well go for 100% completion on this particular title, so even that is nothing worth mentioning for this throughout it though. Unless besides the actual premise of this particular version, as far as I'm aware, we're actually going to be going for 100%. But in forms of, well, we're actually going to be going after every single switches, or in this case, secret switches, I should say, so for this much. However, though, I'm going to be doing something completely different this time around, though. Not only because of how the fact that, well, this game does actually add in a lot more content, excluding the likes of these newer mini-games, because even then, we don't have ourselves the crane game anymore, especially noticeable with this particular egg catcher minigame ever since during the likes of the NES version counterparts. We even know we got ourselves the replacement ones. Well, on the other hand though, except for one only still exists minigame by the forms of the quick draw minigame, but in a completely different style this time around though, because you can definitely tell why when we're actually able to actually get to that minigame. So even then, let's get ourselves the invincibility lollipop, which unlike the ones in the NES version counterpart, and basically that's this particular familiar character introduced in that specific Kirby franchise by the forms of Meta Knight. That how the fact that he originally gives you a invincibility lollipop, but in this game this time around though, they usually place it out of nowhere. So even then, let's get started by the forms of the first boss in the forms of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. This is the forms of Wispy Woods, and since these bosses are a hell of a lot more easier compared to how it does in the forms of the original Kirby's Adventure, this means is that the visual cues by the forms of, you know, some of these bosses, including enemies as well, they're a lot more bigger, and plus it's way too easy to actually deal with this time around though, because of how the fact that, well, they're a lot larger than Kirby, and at the same time, well, I don't mind about it too much. So anyways, now let's move on to the second world in this game by the forms of Ice Cream Island. So as we expected, just like how it does the forms of Kirby's Adventure, we've pretty much we've managed to obtain ourselves by the forms of violet colored star rods. So as we expected, that Vegetable Valley represents, you know, violet, and the Ice Cream Island is basically based off from, well, specifically indigo, as far as the star rod colors we hopefully will try to obtain, because, you know, coding of the rainbow colors, as far as I'm aware, for this little kinds of stuff like that, because, you know, but aside from that though, there's not much else I can really say about the forms of Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. I think there's a lot more improvement over the likes of the NES version counterparts. Now don't get me wrong, I still enjoy the NES version though, but the forms of how the fact that, because it always throws me off whenever I was really used to by the forms of the remakes, especially with the future Kirby games nowadays, especially noticeable by the forms of the comparison to the forms of the original version's counterparts. But even then, that's only because of how the fact that I need to get a lot of practice of some of these mechanics that usually changes up a little bit. So there we go. There we've managed to able to complete ourselves the first level in the forms of Ice Cream Island, and now let's go ahead and continue on. And hopefully we can able to actually do anything else. But before we actually get to this, here we have ourselves another new minigame, Kirby's Air Glide. Press A to grind the rails. So you can't grind onto black rails because you'll temporarily slow down. So even then, let's give this a race, 4 players racing action right here. So even then, yeah. Actually, of all the minigames we're actually going to come across into this game, this one will have to be one of my favorite ones, because of not only because of how energetic this looks, and it's also because of how the fact that it's pretty damn fun as well. Which even though that could be pretty intense at the same time too. Which even though that could be saying much. So even though if you probably time your grinding rails well enough though, right there, as you can see right there, you pretty much win this race no problem. And you know, just like in any other minigames in the forms of Kirby's Adventure as well, every time you win those minigames, you basically get yourself some 1-ups. Like, for instance, I've managed to claim first place in the forms of Kirby's air grinding. Basically, it gives me about 3 extra lives, so even though it's pretty cool stuff. Excuse me. But yeah, that's all I can really say about the forms of this particular version of this game, besides the fact that, well, the graphical style is remarkably different to how it does in the forms of, you know, the original Kirby's Adventure, that's for sure, because even then, the actual background itself does add a lot more detail this time around though, as opposed to how it does in the forms of the original Kirby's Adventure, does has a little bit of a plain background to it, so even then I really do appreciate it by this fact. So we now ended up in a desert for some reason though, which even then though, that seems mainly the case though, and anyway though, there's our Grand Wheelie right there, because I can definitely tell what this badniks, or in this case, this particular enemy's name. In fact, these mini-bosses are a lot more easier to deal with this time around though, not to mention, because if you know, as I mentioned this before, most of these enemies, including bosses, and especially noticeable in mid-bosses, managed to able to retain its redeemable size, but in forms of the much more bigger size than that. And even then though, what makes it a little bit easier compared to how it does it, but in forms of the original Kirby's Adventure this time around though, is that the patterns of the forms of the mid-bosses are a lot more packable this time around though, and even way too easy as a result for this matter, because even then though, you can able to actually no longer have to worry about but in forms of this particular Grand Wheelie mini-boss, to be able to actually just jump around all over the place and all that stuff. And then, yeah, I really do appreciate it by this factor. So we've got ourselves a parasail right there, and just like before, there you can able to actually glide as much as you like if you manage to win to the midair. So yeah, there's not much else I can really say about this here. And what I found is really cool, especially noticeable on the North America commercial of this game, back in 2002. That was before when the forms of Kirby Right Back at Ya exist, but in forms of the animate of the forms of the Kirby TV series. The art style, especially noticeable with this particular commercial style, is remarkably similar to how it does it in the forms of Kirby Right Back at Ya TV series, which I think is actually really cool. Especially noticeable how the forms of how the fact that with the graphical style in the commercial like that looks damn near identical to how it does in the likes of the TV series. So even then, you should definitely go ahead and recommend watching those, especially noticeable if you're a huge fan of Kirby, then you could probably give that series a shot. So even then, that specifically on the final ever episode, in the forms of Kirby Right Back at Ya, but in forms of Right to the Finish, that it normally has the Nightmare, but in forms of the actual final boss, in the forms of Kirby's Adventure, excluding the likes of Nightmare and Dreamland. So speaking of which, I don't really think that Kirby Right Back at Ya doesn't have a whole bunch of references between both. Well, it does have some animal buddies, but in forms of Kirby's Dreamland 2 and 3. But I don't know exactly for 3 though, because I haven't really watched the actual TV series that much. But even then, no, that's only because of how the fact that because of the stupid copyright issue still claims itself. Well, at least as far as I'm mostly consumed with this though, so here's something different for a change when it comes to the background music choice. That appears to be a remakes theme of the forms of, you know, these little mini boss fights you actually come across into in Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. Basically, this particular music makes the existence in the forms of this particular version of the game this time around though, because of how the fact that, speaking of such, this game did manage to, or in this case, the remake of Kirby's Adventure by the forms of Kirby Nightmare and Dreamland. This particular version of the game came out after Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, and before Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, also for the Game Boy Advance, because yes, there are usually 2 of those Kirby games to be released on the Game Boy Advance, so to speak. So even then, one for the remake of the forms of, you know, Kirby's Adventure, and there's also another one by the forms of, well, the original Kirby game to be released, but in forms of, you know, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, well, with a unique twist and turns here and there. So even then, well, we'll explain more on that until we're able to actually get to that game eventually. So, let's go ahead and do this particular bomb relay minigame for a second attempt, and just like before, I'm still suck at this minigame. Can you really tell because of how the fact that my timing skills have to be damn precise on that? Well, I don't have as much of an issue, but in forms of the original cartridge-only versions of that game, because whenever I first experienced of this particular game, well, I don't have as many issues with that particular skills when it comes to the bomb relay. So even then, though, that I really must admit though right away that I need to actually get a lot of practice of that kinds of stuff. So here we go with level 4 right there. So, as you expected, I just really say this right about now. The graphics in this game looks absolutely gorgeous, especially noticeable this was on the Game Boy Advance after all, to make it a little bit more of an improvement over the likes of the NES version counterparts. That's only because of how the fact that they enhanced these graphics down. In this case, it did manage to upgrade the visuals for quite some time. So even then, I really do appreciate it with these kinds of stuff, unlike the ones in, you gotta be kidding me. Ah, screw you, enemy placement. So there goes the first death of the forms of this particular version of the game, or in this case, for more accurately, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. So, as we expected for many other Let's Plays out there, I would appreciate it if I was trying to able to actually go ahead and just trying to able to grab the maximum tomato right from the start though, instead of like keep on getting hit by these little flying type enemies right there loads and loads of times, even for several ground enemies. So even then, let's go ahead and face off against with this particular TikTok clock type of mini boss, and he's actually, you know, way too easy because if you know, he's actually way more bigger than the smaller counterparts, and we've got ourselves our mic ability, and just like the forms of the original version of the forms of, you know, Kirby's Adventure, we can only use the microphone, or in this case some mic ability like 3 limited times. So even now, if you manage to use that 3 times, then you're pretty much done with that ability. So even now, as far as I'm aware for that. So, in fact, one thing I should probably mention about this is that the levels themselves, in the forms of, specifically in this version of the game, but in forms of Kirby's Adventure, or I won't say this version of the game, but more accurately, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, is that, as you can tell, my performance of the forms of proceeding to the next couple of levels up ahead, most of those levels can go really faster this time around though, because of the actual faster processing with those kinds of stuff, but in forms of load times and everything. It just makes this version of the game supremely faster than the likes of the NES version counterparts, because there aren't any frame rate drops, or even especially noticeable by the forms of there's no lag involved, which I really appreciate it. So yeah, speaking of such though, let's talk about this score minigame real quickly. Just like the ones in the original Kirby's Adventure for the NES, you're still able to actually press the 1 button, and that's the forms of just the A button to be able to time your jump until you're able to actually get yourselves the higher opportunities you can get rewards from, like by the forms of scores, and especially with 1-ups. So battle for maximum tomatoes and the Kirby abilities. Even then, and just like the likes of you know, the original Kirby's Adventure, you're still able to actually face off against with some of these mini boss fights in the actual arena, and after when you defeated one of them, you can able to not only nap the maximum tomato, but also you can able to actually nap yourselves the forms of the Kirby abilities themselves as well. So yeah, I do appreciate you with this factor. So what's up with the power cells keep on going after me? What is this, like Kirby's Dreamland 1 extra mode all over again? But I digress. So yeah, again, there's not much else to really say about this game, honestly, because even I know that, oh yeah, I was gonna say about this, actually. Oh yeah, if you're managed able to swallow those 2 enemies all in one go, one of those Kirby ability roulette decides to go completely random, just like how it does in the forms of the original Kirby's Adventure. Well, usually as far as I'm aware for that, so even I know, yeah. At this point is that after this game is released, but in forms of this particular game itself, well, excluding the likes of Kirby Superstar Ultra from the Nintendo DS, this will be a final time we're going to be seeing the actual level introduction and cutscenes, which I really do miss those, because even then though, that I most able to actually enjoy those particular sequences, but in forms every time you're actually entering into the next couple of levels up ahead. Now, I really do enjoy these little cinematics when it comes to the actual the levels themselves whenever you're entering, but in forms of like, let's say for instance, for example, but in forms of the original Kirby's Adventure, or in this case the original Kirby's Dreamland 1, that normally you can able to see the actual cinematic of the forms of how the fact that Kirby got blown out by the forms of the random wind, and able to actually see those butterflies surrounding it. So that's actually pretty cool when it comes to the visual structure in that particular game. So there we go. Now we've actually completely done with the 5th level in the forms of Ice Cream Island. So now let's move on to the next boss in this game, by the forms of, well, Paint Roller. So even though that's as far as you expected. Now, as far as you probably already know, is the fact that, as you can see right there, granted, let's go ahead and get ourselves our laser world quickly, is that much like how it does in forms of Kirby's Adventure, we actually come across into those specific doors right there, warp stars. Use this star to jump to various levels. So just like it likes of how it does in the forms of the Warp Star Station, in the forms of the NES version counterparts, except you now have a little bit more of more details than it looks when it comes to the background structure. So here we go, by the forms of the Painter Roller right there, and just like how it does in the forms of the NES version, although except the fact that he might be very tricky at some points because of the way how he moves, but otherwise though, he's pathetically easy this time around though, compared to how it does in the NES version counterparts. That's only because of how the fact that, well, first of all, he's a lot more bigger, and especially noticeable how the fact that, well, you do have some more of those little opportunities here and there, but hey. Although you still get hit by the forms of how the fact that if you get hit by the enemy or bosses, you're still able to actually lose your Kirby ability in the process though. But even then, I don't mind about it too much though, because even though this is way more improvements than the likes of the original counterparts. So, anyways, those are the 3rd level in this game, by the forms of butter building, but I might actually save that for the next video, so join me next time. Let's play Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland for the Game Boy Advance. It's the fact that we're going to be moving on to level 3, or world 3 I should say, butter building. So yeah, see you guys next time. Later fellas.